He fractured a nation with one shot, yet nothing in John Wilkes Booth's narrative makes sense. Why would an internationally celebrated actor trade renown for disgrace? How did a plan to kidnap transform into an act of presidential assassination? And why was he branded a coward by his comrades when he viewed himself as a patriot? Tonight, we unravel 12 unsettling paradoxes that continue to baffle experts. A physician who insisted he was blameless. A $1.5 million reward refused by thousands. A desperate flight through mist-shrouded waterways toward his foes. And a last act so strange it fundamentally altered American jurisprudence. This is not the Lincoln assassination you recall. This is the tale they never intended for you to fully uncover, where each discovery pulls you further into Booth's distortions and every truth conceals a falsehood. But before we start, please like and subscribe to our channel to help our community grow. After Abraham Lincoln won a second term as president in 1864, John Wilkes Booth and his cohorts formulated a plot. Their intention was to abduct Lincoln and then use him as a bargaining chip to secure the release of imprisoned Confederate soldiers. They also arranged several contingency plans. One plot aimed to seize Lincoln in March of 1865 while he rode in a carriage. However, a last-minute change to the president's schedule thwarted that effort. Another involved capturing Lincoln inside Ford's Theater and lowering him from his box using ropes. But as the Civil War was nearing its conclusion, with a Northern victory increasingly certain, freeing prisoners would no longer impact the war's outcome, leading Booth to choose a far more radical and violent path. Killing Lincoln was only the start. Booth's full conspiracy actually required a finale reminiscent of the film Casino. He and his accomplices planned to assassinate 4 key Union leaders that very night. The other targets were Vice President Andrew Johnson, Secretary of State William Seward, and Union General Ulysses S. Grant. The idea was to throw the entire Northern leadership into chaos by decapitating its command structure. This, they believed, would allow the Confederacy a chance to regroup and assault Washington. When the night came, Booth used his privilege as an actor to gain entry to Ford's Theater. Once Lincoln was absorbed in watching a play called Our American Cousin, Booth entered the box, drew a Derringer pistol, and at 10:15 p.m. shot Lincoln in the back of the head. Unbeknownst to Booth at that moment, this murder would be the only one of the 4 intended killings to actually succeed. After firing the fatal shot, Booth rushed past stunned spectators and attempted to leap to the stage below. A military officer, Henry Rathbone, tried to apprehend him, but Booth stabbed Rathbone in the shoulder. Immediately afterward, Booth jumped toward the stage, landing awkwardly and breaking his leg. The theater audience was initially confused. Some believed the commotion was part of the show, until they heard the First Lady scream. Booth rose on the stage and shouted 3 Latin words that would reverberate throughout history. Sic semper tyrannis, which translates into English as thus always to tyrants. Officially, he didn't coin that phrase himself. The expression sic semper tyrannis was historically linked with Brutus and the assassins of Julius Caesar. Intriguingly, Booth had once portrayed Brutus in a theatrical production. The motto was also the official state slogan of Virginia. The president was dead. The atmosphere in the theater descended into chaos. Soldiers flooded the building. Booth knew he had to escape the Capitol immediately. A fellow conspirator had arranged for a horse, waiting for him at the stage door. Booth mounted the animal and crossed the Navy Yard Bridge into Maryland. On the opposite shore, Booth met a co-conspirator named David Harold. They traveled together to a small town called Surrattsville, Maryland. There they visited Surratt's Tavern, whose owners had hidden supplies for the fugitives. Knowing the army would be in close pursuit, they only stayed briefly. They gathered the necessary items, armed themselves with weapons, and continued their journey. At 4 a.m. on April 15th, Booth and Harold arrived in Maryland at the home of Dr. Samuel Mudd. Mudd treated Booth's broken leg and permitted both men to rest at his house for several hours. Though Mudd was a country doctor known for his Confederate sympathies, it remains uncertain if he recognized Booth and Herold or understood their actions. He later denied any knowledge of the assassination plot, but it helped little. Authorities sent him to prison regardless. Nevertheless, once sufficiently recovered, Booth and his companion resumed their travel. They wandered through a swamp and then paid a farmer to guide them to Rich Hill, the home of another Confederate sympathizer named Samuel Cox. Hindered by Booth's injury, the pair did not arrive until 1 a.m. the following day. Samuel Cox may have been sympathetic to Booth and Herold's plight, but he was also keenly aware of the danger they posed to him. More than 1,000 Union troops had been deployed to hunt Booth, and the reward for the conspirators totaled $100,000, approximately today's equivalent of $1.5 million. If Cox were caught aiding the fugitives, the penalties would be severe. Aware of the immense risk, Cox directed Booth and Herold to a nearby pine grove on the edge of his property. This would give them a vantage point to look for an opportunity to cross the Potomac into Virginia, while granting Cox plausible deniability if apprehended. Booth himself was infuriated that Cox refused them shelter inside his home. Nevertheless, they complied with the arrangement and tried to adapt. Booth and Herold remained hidden within the pine grove for 4 entire days. Periodically, an associate of Cox named Thomas Jones delivered food, water, and newspapers. It was through these papers that Booth first discovered he was almost universally denounced as a criminal and a coward. Having viewed his deed as heroic, Booth felt profound dismay. In his journal, he likened himself to icons such as William Tell and Marcus Junius Brutus, questioning why he was deemed an ordinary assassin while they were hailed as champions. The diary's origin remains uncertain, yet this text stands as the sole primary record of Booth's reflections throughout this period. We learn from this journal that on April 18th, a detachment of Union troops marched within 600 feet of the pine copse. Fearing their horses might betray them, Herold decided to quiet the animals. 6 days after the murder, the troops hunting Booth departed the vicinity near Cox's dwelling. Thomas Jones notified the fugitives, and at twilight on April 20th, they set off again. Though the Potomac lay merely 3.5 miles distant, their progress was painfully slow owing to Booth's injury. Upon finally reaching the river, Jones placed both men inside a tiny dinghy. Refusing any payment for his aid, Jones launched them onto the water and parted ways with them. Unfortunately for Booth and Herold, the night was foggy, and navigation proved challenging. Instead of reaching Machodoc Creek in Virginia as intended, they became disoriented and wound up back within Maryland. On the 21st, the escapees obtained provisions from a farmstead close to the creek. They returned to the boat where, for reasons still ambiguous today, they remained inactive. Scholars conjecture Booth's leg might have pained him severely, or that both might have heard reports regarding Union patrols nearby. Yet certainty eludes history. All that is confirmed is that rather than continuing along the Potomac as scheduled, the fugitives passed the night of April 21st at Nanjemoy Creek in Maryland. The fugitives set off anew the next evening. Fog persisted, yet this time the mist aided their escape by cloaking their river crossing. Booth's journal mentions a narrow escape. The small vessel strayed dangerously near a Union gunboat, though they avoided detection and the thick fog concealed them. Simultaneously, Union troops were drawing the net tighter around the pair. Back in Maryland, Dr. Mudd's residence was surrounded by soldiers, and the owners of Surratt's Tavern were arrested. The Army understood Booth was making for Virginia and commenced flooding its roads with troops. On the morning of April 23rd, the fugitives finally attained Virginia. They promptly connected with a supporter named Elizabeth Quessenberry, who provided sustenance before directing them to a Dr. Richard Stewart. They attained Stewart's dwelling successfully. Yet, upon discovering their identities, Stuart expelled Booth and Harold immediately. Requiring refuge, they resolved to proceed toward the home of a freed black individual called William Lucas. Like Stuart, Lucas declined to host the fugitives overnight. Furious and hopeless, Booth menaced Lucas with a blade, compelling him and his family to pass the night on their own porch. The next day, Booth and Harold compelled Lucas's son to convey them to Port Royal. There, the fugitives encountered a former Confederate soldier called Willie Jett. Jett proposed hiding the pair inside a residence he knew of, yet the dwelling was inhabited by two unmarried women. Lincoln's killer and his companion deemed it inappropriate to lodge there under such circumstances. Thus, they journeyed onwards. On April 24th, Booth and Harold attained a farmstead owned by Richard Garrett, unknown to them. Booth, likely employing his theatrical talents, persuaded Garrett that both were soldiers and that Booth's limb had been fractured during service. Garrett accepted the ruse and offered them overnight accommodation. The subsequent day, Booth slept late, drank heavily, and amused Garrett's offspring. By dusk, the household grew wary of the escapees and demanded they pass the night inside the barn. Booth consented and proceeded to his fresh quarters for repose. It would mark his ultimate rest forever. While Booth and Harold slept, Union forces approached. Willie Jett, the Confederate soldier who had attempted to aid their escape, had informed the authorities regarding the fugitives' location. Near 2:30 a.m. on April 26th, Booth was roused by horses nearing the barn. The cavalry had come. He awakened Harold, and both tried to flee. Unbeknownst to them, soon after they went to sleep, the Garretts, fearing the fugitives might steal their horses, had locked them within the barn. They were trapped. Union troops encircled the barn. They possessed orders from War Secretary Edwin Stanton to seize Booth alive, so a standoff began. Harold pleaded with Booth to permit his surrender. Booth consented and released Harold, but reserved separate intentions for himself. As the stalemate wore on, Union soldiers commenced encircling the barn with kindling. Booth recognized they intended business, and his time dwindled. He endeavored to elude destiny by defying the Union commander to single combat for his liberty. But the troops dismissed it. The kindling was fired, and the barn erupted in flames. Booth lunged out and was instantly shot by a soldier named Boston Corbett. During his last moments, Booth begged a soldier to raise his hand so he might view it. The soldiers obliged, and while peering at his hand, Booth voiced his dying words, "Useless, useless." Then at 7:15 a.m., John Wilkes Booth perished. Booth died, whispering, "Useless." But nothing about this manhunt was pointless, because 160 years later, his story still hides 12 explosive contradictions. Why did Confederates he trusted betray him? How did a $1.5 million bounty fail? And why did Booth, the man who planned everything, get lost in 3 miles of fog? We've dissected the evidence, but history's greatest mystery remains. Was John Wilkes Booth a fanatic or a pawn? Think you've solved it? Drop your theory below. Was Dr. Mudd really innocent? Did Stanton let him escape? And why did Virginia, the state whose motto he shouted, abandon him to die? This isn't just history, it's a warning how easily delusion becomes destiny, how one man's heroism becomes a nation's nightmare. Stay curious, stay questioning, and remember, the darkest truths are the ones still buried.